welcome, ladies. I am really excited about today's interview with Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. And what would you like me to call you as we're talking?
Sure, you can say Jennifer, no problem.
Okay,
it's a mouthful.
So I just want to tell you a little bit about her. She is a psychotherapist with a PhD in counseling and psychology from Boston College. She wrote her dissertation on LDS women and sexuality and has taught college level courses on human sexuality, and she currently has online courses and community-based courses for relationships and sexuality courses. She contributes to a lot of podcasts, LDS-themed blogs, magazines. She maintains a private practice in Chicago where she lives with her husband and her 3 children. So thank you, Jennifer, so much for agreeing to this interview. I know I have several women that are so excited. I've gotten several questions from them as they've listened to some podcasts that you passed to me and I passed to them. So
Great.
I'm excited to get their questions answered. And I love the work that you're doing. I feel like it is so pertinent and it's so needed. And I love how you talk about we need to be connected with our sexual part of us, our sexual being, to be a whole woman. And so we're going to talk about quite a bit of that today, but we're first going to kind of dive into a little bit on a relationship basis, on having a good relationship with our spouses. And so I'll just dive into some of these questions and then we'll let it take us where we're going.
Great.
So I found that a lot of times we assume that our husbands are a version of us, and that's how we tend to approach circumstances with our husbands. And that's one of the things that I work on with women, is helping them understand we speak totally 2 different languages. So I wanted to just ask you how you felt this shows up in couples that you work with, and what kind of influence this has on our assumptions as women that our men should react and act and do things the way we do them. Do you find that coming out?
I do, and I maybe think about it slightly differently than the way you're saying it, but I guess what I would say is we want for our spouses to be reflections of ourselves. And men want this also, because we want to think of ourselves as loving people and then do whatever is comfortable for us. And so because we want that, because most of us resist the growth that marriage is going to pressure upon us. So I think that growth is uncomfortable, and we resist it. We resist expanding our capacity to really love another person. I think we resist knowing another person because of the ways that it challenges us to be better people. So I think the love language idea is valuable because it helps us to recognize what we tend to do, what our spouse tends to want. But I think it's not really a true idea that we are well-intentioned and just missing each other. I think what it really is we want the other person to be like us so we don't have to stretch. And I think really what marriage in its best form does is it stretches us, and it helps us to be more capable of really caring for another person in all of their difference.
Yeah, I like that. I actually really like that concept. I believe that is so true. And when I listen to your talking about perfectionism podcast, a lot of that really resonated with me. And I love how you talk about the need to develop. That as humans, that's what we're here for, is to develop. And so in our marriage relationships, we should desire, right, to want to develop a stronger connection, which would mean understanding him, understanding her.
Yes, that's right.
That's awesome. So what's your opinion on couples that say, oh, this is as good as it's going to get, I'm just going to settle? What's the long-term consequences to that?
Well, I do think there's room for acceptance in a marriage of another person and kind of recognizing who they are and not resenting them for how they're different from you.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that when we just kind of throw up our hands and say it's never going to get better, oftentimes what we're doing is we're also letting ourselves off the hook. And we're doing it in the name of putting up with our annoying spouse. Okay, kind of we take a sort of self-righteous position, like I would be fully capable of a good marriage except for you. And we like that idea because it allows us to mask how we participate in a bad marriage. Now, I'm not saying everybody in an unhappy marriage is a equal participant in a bad marriage, but oftentimes we're doing things that sustain and in a sense, give our spouse the excuse to keep living in an indulgent or low-level way. We have a kind of, something you can think is, how do I make it easy for my spouse to do the things that they do that bother me?
Mhm.
Right? How do I make it easy for them to feel justified in it?
Mhm.
What are the things that I do that would be hard to live with?
Yeah.
Because it's, you can't control your partner as much as we might want to. We
Mhm.
can control ourselves, and most of us use the fact that we can't control our spouse or get them to be who we want them to be to not get a hold of ourselves. And I think that is indulgent on our part. And I think, when we promise to love someone in marriage, usually what we are actually saying is, I promise to love you as long as you love me first and love me better. And when you really promise to love someone, you're saying through thick and thin, through better and worse, I am going to really deal with my limitations to be a good friend to you, to really care about you, even when you're making me upset. And I'm not talking about being a doormat. I'm talking about really caring for someone, even when they're frustrating you, or doing the hard work of creating a good marriage. You can only control your half, but when you do control your half and you do function at a higher level, you do pressure your spouse to do similarly because they're no longer justified in their position.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, because I've heard this, and in all my studying, I've heard this several times, that it only takes one person to change a relationship around.
Yes, because you change the dynamic of it.
Okay.
It's Harriet Lerner writes a few books, The Art of, I'm sorry, no, she writes The Dance of Anger and The Dance of Intimacy. And this is very much the frame she talks in, which is that it takes two to dance. And so if you're not doing the old steps, if your spouse is going to keep dancing with you, they have to change their steps.
Okay. Oh, I like
Yeah.
that. And what was her name?
Harriet Lerner, Lerner, and she writes The Dance of Intimacy and The Dance of Anger.
Okay. Oh,
Both two excellent books.
oh, great. Those are great. So if you have a client and she's wanting to work on herself, but her husband has zero interest, what would you would encourage her to keep working on what she has control over?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Even for her own sake. I mean, I have these online courses,
Mhm.
and I have had a lot of people write and say to me, I bought these courses because I was so aware of how my spouse needed to change. Then I went through them, and all I could focus on was all the things that I was doing that I had been blind to. And that just starting to really confront themselves and deal with their own negative behaviors that often we have a hard time seeing ourselves accurately, actually. And so starting to face yourself and deal with it starts to change the marriage.
Mhm.
I was saying to a client this morning, I think you need to be kinder to your husband. She was saying, I need to do that because he needs that from me. And I said, he may need that from you, but more importantly, you need to do that for your sake.
Mhm.
Because you're not living up to your best self, you feel bad about yourself. And you owe it to yourself to live up to your own values, almost irrespective of the impact it has on your spouse.
Mhm.
Because that she was saying, I'm greedy. And
Mhm.
I was saying, you owe it to yourself to not live in a greedy way
Yeah.
because you don't think it's respect worthy.
Yeah. That would
Hmm.
certainly help with the guilt level that we as
Absolutely.
so good at caring.
Yes, right. And we as women carry a kind of guilt that is about, oh, I'm such a failure, I'm such a loser, I'm not, but it's not a kind of pro-social constructive guilt often. I think guilt is actually a virtue if it leads you to move into better action. If
Yes.
it's like, I feel bad about the fact that I'm taking advantage of my husband, or I'm not really choosing him wholeheartedly, then I would say, then you owe it to yourself to do differently in your marriage. That's a kind of guilt that pushes you forward and into higher functioning.
Mhm.
And so it's a virtue. But if you just like living in guilt and you get to feel like, oh, I'm just a failure, but you take a kind of perverse comfort in feeling like a failure, like many of us do, then there's no virtue in that guilt.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. I like how you've brought that together where guilt can be a positive thing if it's moving
Yes,
forward in a forward intention that's going to help you create a happier place for you, even if
right,
the weather isn't changing.
right.
You know? Yeah, I believe as women, we have a lot of power in our relationships,
Absolutely we do.
for good or bad.
Absolutely we do. Right. And that moral conscience is a great thing. Chronic self-flagellation is not.
Yes.
Right. So I'm talking about moral conscience drives you forward and drives you to do things. You know, the woman this morning was saying, I feel awkward telling my husband I love him. And I'm like, there are worse things than feeling awkward,
Mm,
right? Loving him and caring about him, living up to your own values is more important than how you feel in the moment.
yeah.
The feelings of peace with yourself come after the reaching into something that's unfamiliar to you.
Mhm. I like.
And a lot of us grow up in families where we learn to kind of be in a kind of self-hating position.
Mhm.
And so it's familiar, and pushing ourselves to function at a higher level feels awkward, but that's okay because that's what it takes to move into a way of relating to others differently and in a way that that gives us greater peace.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah, because even, in those moments that I know I've reacted wrong, I've done something, yeah, just acted totally off of my cuff, and
Hmm.
make myself go through that uncomfortableness.
Yes.
Saying, "Hon, I'm really sorry. I did not mean to come across that way." Then afterwards, that peace does come. Like, oh, that was.
Yes.
But if I don't go there, if I don't push myself there, then
Yes.
when resentments start to build, the anger builds. I go inside my
Yes.
box. Nothing good comes.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. uh, Somebody whose work I follow closely is Dr. David Schnarch, and one of the things he says is there's no peace without integrity.
Mm,
So we will resist it because it's uncomfortable. I don't want to apologize. I don't want to deal with my bad part in this. He had a bad part too, or whatever it is. But we're never at peace when we do that. And if we will take care of our part, at least we're at peace.
yes,
And
yes.
so, you owe it to yourself to stretch yourself towards what you believe is decent and fair and right in your marriage, in your relationships, because that's where you find self-respect.
Mhm. Yeah, so true. I like that a lot. The client I was working with this morning struggles with beating herself up and pushing her through that point, and
Mm,
this will be so helpful for her. So,
great.
in one of your podcasts, the one that you talk about, oh, actually, no, this one was a different one. This is one where you talk about intimacy, and you had come out and did a seminar here in Utah somewhere, and realized how challenging it is for women to receive.
Yes.
And that's a big one that we work on.
Yes.
The comment you made a comment that really stuck out to me, that as women, we like the control as the giver,
Yes.
and that we are needed and necessary. And that's where we get our sense of self.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. And let me start by saying I don't actually think that's giving. And
Mm,
we're calling it giving when it's about managing our own sense of self in our relationships. We're managing our sense of self by trying to feel important, as you said, necessary, indispensable.
mhm,
And it kind of fosters our self-righteousness and our resentment at the same time. And it's a way of kind of keeping ourselves out of intimate contact with another person. So even though it looks good, and I think culturally, many of us have been inducted into that frame of that's what goodness is as a woman, as she gives and gives and gives and gives and never asks for anything. There's a kind of safety in it because it's low contact and it's self-important. And so it's, I really think a true giver and true receiver are reciprocal positions. You can't be good at one without being good at the other. Meaning there are a lot of people that are takers. That's not the same thing as being a receiver. Okay, a receiver is you actually take in the goodness, you acknowledge the goodness that's around you. It's about being willing to say that someone has a positive impact on you and letting them have a positive impact on you and letting them know that they have a positive impact. That for people feels very exposing and low control.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I do believe that some people won't receive because they like the control of not receiving. I also think some people don't like to receive because it means you have to expand your sense of self in order to receive. You have to tolerate feeling worthy of it. And I remember in my own marriage in the beginning years of it, knowing that I had married a really good person and knowing that he really did love me and wanting in some ways to see it, reduce it in a way, to kind of reduce what was there, because then I felt more in control of it. And I remember really recognizing it wasn't decent to do that. And that I had to open my heart up and kind of take in the goodness that was there and expand my sense of self as being worthy of it and really let him give to me, let him love me and to receive it and acknowledge it. And acknowledge the positive impact he had on my life, that it was both good for him and me. And the more deeply you receive, the more generous you are, because you see the goodness that's being offered, not because you're entitled to it, but because someone is loving and kind enough to offer it. Even the universe, the beauty that's around us, to receive the beauty of nature, to receive the nurturing of food, to receive sleep, to receive all these good things in our life is, in a sense, to step out of entitlement and control and to let it impact us for good while acknowledging the positive. It doesn't mean we're dependent on meaning if my husband were to betray me or to die, heaven forbid, I could sustain my life. I don't need my husband in that sense, but he deeply blesses my life. And so it's a way of acknowledging you have a real impact on me, which is different than can I sustain myself if I had to? Yes, I could. But he deeply impacts me. And to let that be alive between us is fundamental to receiving.
I like that. And do you feel that for men, because men are, what I've studied, are they're natural protectors and providers. They want to provide for us.
Yes.
And when we aren't willing to receive from them,
right.
That probably hits them deeper than we realize.
Yes, it does. One of the things my husband said to me one time is he said, I appreciate how deeply you receive from me. Right? Because it's the receiver and the received. Right? It's like to be received is a form of giving. Right? Because it's saying you matter. You bless my life. And my husband really does. And he gives me so much. So I think that, first of all, I think we've constructed men's sexuality often as being a negative thing. That men are sexual and they're the brutes and we have to put up with them. And if we put up with them, that makes us virtuous women. And I think it's really the wrong way to see sexuality for men and women. Men can be brutes, okay? Let's be clear that there are some men that exploit with their sexuality. But to have that be a starting paradigm is unfair, I think. I think we need to see men's sexual nature as a capacity to deeply bless a woman's life.